says 35. It says 35. Yeah, I see it.
Seems okay.
I mean, people can jump in any time. I think they can log in, right? Oh, now it's up to 39.
Yeah.
Good evening. We're here tonight to hold two public hearings, and we're going to actually hold them jointly because the subject matter is identical for each of the public hearings. But before we open up the two public hearings, I'm going to have Jason provide some, oh, we need a roll call, sorry, but we didn't open the public hearing yet. I'm going to have Jason provide some historical background on this project and kind of level set where things are at. Then I will go through a set of rules for the public hearing, and then we'll open up the public hearing probably in 10 or 15 minutes. Jason?
So I'll say at the outset, bear with us here tonight, folks. This is a unique format that we're working in, hybrid. Just to start, Ben, are you able to hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to start out here tonight with a few introductory slides. For those here in the room, we're projecting on the front screen for those of you at home. And Ben, you're confirming for me that you can see our images at home?
Yep, I'm looking at project objective slide there.
Okay, so everybody, both at home and in the room, is seeing the same material, so we're off to a decent start at least. The first slide here, just to kind of recap, I think most of you that are here tonight have hopefully heard a larger presentation from us. We assembled a work group about 9 months ago in response to the extensive public comment that we were hearing a year ago and you were hearing based upon a different proposal at that time. And so we brought together a work group that was representative of neighbors. We had 4 different neighborhood residents participate. We had 3 different developer expert types participate. The ownership group had a seat at the table, and then finally town and county staff. And so the project objective, our charter that guided the project, is what you're seeing here. And fundamentally, the project was intended to consider neighborhood, owner, municipal, and developer interests to balance neighborhood compatibility, economic development, and natural resource considerations. So the idea when we do these types of projects is a recognition that there's more than one very interested party. In this case, we had essentially 4 different interested stakeholder group types. And when we agree to engage in a project like this, the idea is to not put any one of those stakeholders above the other. And so we talked a lot during the course of the work group project about compromise at times. So with that, Jake, if you want to advance to the next slide. This is a slide, again, that many of you have likely seen before. This was the final recommendations that the work group landed on after an awful lot of debate about use in particular and density. What I'd like to do is just go around the 6 zones that we ended up with. We had originally split the farm a little bit differently for study purposes, but we'll start in the northwest corner. So in that northwest corner, the area is called out for single-family use, and specifically larger lots, 20,000 square feet, and a density of 1 unit per acre. The reason the work group felt that that was the best use is a recognition that there's really only one good way to get at that area, and it's an extension of the existing subdivision road that's stubbed right there at the west line. That was the easiest of the 6 zones that we dealt with. The only conversation really was, should single-family condominiums also be allowed there? At least one work group member favored that, and ultimately the group felt comfortable with that. So jumping over to Area 2. Area 2, the recommendation was single-family lots or condos, and in this case, condos up to 2 to 4 units in a building, and a density of 3 units per acre. So 3 unit per acre density in terms of condominiums is, if you want to see an example of that, we've got one in the neighborhood, the High Ridge condominiums, just 1,000 feet or so away right along Gulf Road. The developers in the room felt that Area 2 was ideal for condominium type use because of the green space and the wooded backdrop in the northwest corner of the property. We do see examples in the area. We looked at a number of, what we would call luxury condominiums that were higher than 3 units per acre. Pabst Farms, an example that the group liked, was somewhere around 4 units per acre. So if we were only listening to one voice, one stakeholder voice on this area, we might have landed at 4 units per acre. That's where the developer in the room thought would be a good landing spot. Conversely, we had a neighborhood representative who lived immediately east of this area who felt single-family lots would be the most desirable use, but ultimately he came back and said he thought that condos would be palatable as well. So I'll call that the first compromise as we work around the horn. As we get over to Area 3 is in the northwest corner of the property. That area is immediately abutting single family to the north, but there's a large area of wetland and environmental corridor, and then single family right across Glen Cove Road. So the group favored single family in this area, and I should note that this is the first zone where your existing land use plan, both town and county, calls for commercial and office type uses. So everything in areas 1 and 2 has long been planned for some sort of residential use. From 3, 4, and 5 southward, that's all existing planned commercial and office park. So part of the rationale of the developers in the room on Area 3 was a feeling that single-family use was more palatable, but a recognition that because of I-94 being nearby and the traffic, noise and what have you, that might be a way to better make the development viable. In Area 2, I should have mentioned that there's also high bedrock conditions, and that was part of the rationale for going a bit higher on the density than you might see immediately across the road. So into Area 4. Area 4 is the most insulated of the different zones on the site. The work group felt that this area was appropriate for the broadest range of use types, inclusive of senior 2 to 4 unit condos, office, higher density single family residential, and high quality multifamily residential at a max of 6 units per acre. We spent a lot of time on Area 4 and debating should there be any high quality multifamily on the table, and if so, what is the appropriate density? If we were listening to one of our stakeholder groups only, the developers in the room would have said 10 to 12 units per acre might be appropriate here. our condo developer who sat on the committee said I'd have a hard time developing condos right along I-94 because of the aesthetics and the noise. And accordingly, if we're on the flip side, only listening to the neighborhood interests, they were telling us, well, our tolerance is really at about 4 units per acre, and we'd like to see smaller buildings overall. And so on that issue, we ultimately, kind of worked towards the developer and the developer side, the owner side saying we'd tolerate being at 8, the other side being at 4. We met in the middle at 6. We also sought out examples of projects that have been attractively designed, a mix of building types. We showed examples from Wimmer communities, for instance, that showed a mix of 4, 6, 8 unit buildings. So the 6 units per acre is not a common multifamily residential density. Some of the comments I've been seeing the last few weeks from folks suggest that density is what you see in cities, and I would say that this is lower than what we would typically see in your typical suburban setting. So it was meant to be kind of a context-sensitive town number. And certainly I think the work group appreciated that was pushing some in the group a bit out of their comfort zone. Ultimately, the group was agreeable moving forward at 6, but with at least one member and probably more expressing some uneasiness about 6. Now, part of the challenge with Area 4 is if condos are difficult because of aesthetics, and if you take the high-quality multifamily off the table, your use list gets smaller. And at some point, the more you take away, the fewer options you have, and the office market has been soft. That's what our developers in the room were confirming. So you have to keep all of that in mind. As we get over to Zone 5 had a similar list of use types, but takes away the high-quality multifamily options. So the only thing that's available there is condominium form of ownership. And then senior uses, office uses. And we'll talk about height in a minute as well. Over to Area 6, the only difference from Area 5 is that office is not available there. And again, that was a recognition that you've got a neighborhood immediately west of Glen Cove Road, and trying to get what could be a higher traffic use a little bit further removed and away from that zone. So I would say of the 6 meetings that we had, it took us about 4 just to get to some degree of complete on the use scenarios. So Jake, if you want to advance to the next slide. At the last meeting, Town Plan Commission members asked if we could show a worst case scenario, so to speak, of a scenario where there would be the highest number of, say, senior dwelling units. And I'm hesitant to call anything a worst or best case or in between, because I think they're all just different at the end of the day. So the work group had seen maximum dwelling unit projections. We had on the density board that's been on the website for months. We had shown essentially the number that's in the left-hand column under scenario 1. So Jake, maybe move the mouse around just a little bit to keep up with me. So what we did is we showed 7 different scenarios, because there's, with 6 different use zones and potentially 4 or 5 different use types in each of those zones, there's many more scenarios than 7, but we just wanted to grab maybe some of the ones that seem like they might be likely. So the first scenario says no senior dwelling units whatsoever. So in that left-hand column, you end up with 464 regular units, not a single senior unit. And then the trips per day, this comes from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. They've got very detailed calcs for every use imaginable. And what you end up with on a daily basis is a little over 3,000 trips per day. And then as we go across the list, we're just changing the use type in each one of these different scenarios. So in scenario 2, as a for instance, we add that senior use replaces the prospect of 6 units per acre high-quality multifamily. And then you see how the resultant density count changes. So you end up reducing the regular unit count by a couple of hundred units, and instead it's replaced with 400 senior units. And again, I want to emphasize that senior units run the gamut anywhere from memory care units that tend to be 250 to 300 square feet, so the size of a hotel room or a dorm room, on up to independent villas that might be 1,500 square feet. Many of the senior facilities that we see today have at least a couple different types of, or brands of senior, and have a mix of use types. We ended up using a facility for traffic purposes that had several different use types, from very small on up to independent. So keep going across here, and what I want to point out is that no matter which button we push, so to speak, in these different scenarios, the traffic counts were amazingly similar across all 7 use types. The range is generally right around 2,900 to 3,100 trips per day. Right there on the bottom of the screen, Jake, if you want to slide over just a little bit, we just put a statement in for comparison's sake. Many don't realize, but single-family detached housing is actually the biggest traffic generator of the different use types that we're talking about, 9.4 trips per day. So if we just calculated 152 acres and no consideration of wetlands whatsoever, that would yield 304 units. 304 units at 9.4 trips per day equals almost 2,900 trips. So again, interesting how it compared to the seven different scenarios that we ran. To put it into perspective, the Gulf Road today has an average daily traffic count of somewhere around 4,400 trips per day. I've talked to our transportation engineers and said, well, at what point do you consider Gulf Road to be overloaded? When would it need to be something more than 2 lanes? The rule of thumb for that is 18,000 trips per day. So any of these 7 scenarios would end up, putting all together with the existing trips that are non-Thomas Farm related, you'd end up, over 7,000 trips per day, less than half of what's considered capacity for a 2-lane highway. So last thing I'll mention on traffic is that the time of day of traffic is fairly interesting across use types. Senior units, as a for instance, because folks aren't heading out the door to work like a single-family subdivision would produce, they generate roughly 1/5 to 1/6 of the traffic of a conventional dwelling unit during rush hour times. So between 7 and 9 in the morning, 4 and 6 in the afternoon. And that's because most of the traffic coming from a senior facility is coming with workers coming and going, and apparently in that industry it doesn't all happen at rush hour time. It's probably 3 shifts. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we talked about height quite a bit as well. Most of the project area is projected to have a maximum 2-story height limit. That's every area that's in pink on your map. And then the areas in red were projected to have a maximum height of 3 stories. So there were a couple of adjustments made as we went. On the east side, One of the neighborhood representatives asked that that red line be shifted a bit southward. It had originally been, Jake, I think about right where the word Elmhurst is. Right in that general area. That was shifted southward to give a little bit more breathing space for the subdivision to the east of the project. And then the committee also liked the idea of building in some separation from Glen Cove Road. So that's why you see that 500-foot zone there. There is also a landscape buffer planned at 75 feet along that road. There's a landscape buffer planned around all sides of the development, and we'll show that in a minute. So the idea was that height would be limited to the areas closest to 94 and most pulled to the interior of the site, and trying to take advantage of the tree lines that exist naturally in what's zone 4, that inner part of the site. Next slide. And this is the proposed open space map. So you'll see those landscape buffers I was referring to are in that brownish color. A little bit heavier buffer because things are so flat and open on the west side of the project area. Whereas on the east side, there's already a pretty dense tree line to the east of Elmhurst Road, and so the buffer is variable to try to preserve the large oak trees to the north. It's 50 feet, and then 30 feet south of that point. The other areas in light green are tree lines or wooded areas that would be preserved. Everything that's shown in aqua or darker green is either environmental corridor or wetland or both. We did have a comment from one of you in the Plan Commission at the last meeting about have the resources been delineated? And the answer is no. There's not been field work done. And so I talked to town staff after we had that question, because essentially the question is, what assurance do we have that this is what we get? And so it was as simple as making, I think, a 1 or 2 word change in the ordinance text to suggest that the minimum open space must be at least as large as the aqua and the green on the map. So in other words, if a delineation is done and the corridor gets a little bit bigger, that's the area that will be required to be preserved. If it gets smaller, well, it is what it is. We know from looking at the aerials, almost all of it is wooded, regardless of what sewer pack would call it, environmental corridor, what have you. So I think those are the highlights that I wanted to share. Again, there's been a lot of work on the part of all the different stakeholders that sat with us along the way. A lot of work on the part of your town staff in helping us as well. We certainly tried to provide as many examples as we could, and we'll be happy to answer questions when we get to that point. But today is more so about hearing from the public and taking those comments, but at least wanted to introduce some of the background on the project.
Thank you, Jason. So before we begin the public hearing, I'd like to thank Jason and the entire Waukesha County staff that has worked diligently on this for the last 9 to 12 to 15 months. I'd also like to thank the members of the working group who gave freely of their time and spent a lot of time and effort working on this project over the last 9 months. Tonight, we're holding 2 public hearings. As I mentioned, we're going to be taking comments on a proposed new ordinance. I want to remind you, we're not going to be taking any action tonight. We're not going to hold a planning commission meeting itself. We're just going to be here to listen. In the future, if and when the planning commission and the town board take action, it again is just drafting an ordinance. We are not effectuating a zoning change at any time in the near future or even foreseeable future. That would only occur at some point if an interested party came in and requested a zoning change. If that were to occur, there'd be another whole series of meetings and hearings, including at least 1 public hearing in connection with the rezoning. To the extent you've provided written comments, and we had about 30 come in over the last few days, we appreciate that. We have them all here tonight with us. While you're certainly free to speak again at the public hearing, subject to the rules I'll go through in a minute, I would encourage you, if you have nothing new to add to what was in your written submission, that we have received and read all of your written submissions. Similarly, most of us were at the open house on January 6th when we had a virtual open house that was hosted by the county and opened up for public comments at the end of that open house. And so we were in attendance at that as well. We're going to go, once we open up the public hearing, we're going to have the folks here that want to speak first, and then we're going to turn it over to the Teams group. And Ben's going to manage the Teams group to allow people to speak at the right time. The published rules, which were included in the packet tonight, is if you're present, the speakers must sign and present a speaker card to the town clerk. You must speak from the podium and into the microphone. Everybody watching this on YouTube or on Teams will not hear you, I can assure you, if you're not speaking directly into the microphone. Even for those on the phone, speakers must state their name and address for the record. All comments must be directed to the chairperson. Speakers can provide comments and ask questions to speak into the record. However, there will not be a dialogue between members of the Plan Commission, Town Board, or staff with the speaker. Members of the Plan Commission or Town Board may ask clarifying questions if they believe the meaning is unclear. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes, be respectful of time for all of those who wish to speak, and by being concise and not repeating comments previously made by others. The speaker's time may not be deferred to another speaker. Each speaker may only speak once. Please turn off all cell phones and other electronic devices or put them in silent mode. Speaking out of order or from the audience is not acceptable. Please refrain from applause or reactions which are disruptive and not productive. Such conversations from the citizens are also disruptive and disrespectful of the speaker and should only take place outside the meeting room. So with that, I will call to order the public hearing at 6:55. We'll do a roll call. Dan?
Present, please state your name. Commissioner Dickinson, sorry. Commissioner Diederich.
Present.
Supervisor Kranek.
Present.
Chairman Troy.
Present.
Chairperson Fitzgerald.
Present.
Commissioner Frank.
Present.
Also present Tim Barbeau and Jason Cruz.
Okay, thank you. I'll read the two notices. Notice is hereby given that a public hearing will be held by the Town of Delafield Town Board and Plan Commission on Tuesday, March 16th, 2021, starting at 6:30 p.m. at the Delafield Town Hall, W302 N1254, Maple Avenue, Delafield, Wisconsin 53018. The purpose of the hearing is to consider the adoption of an ordinance to create Section 17.045R, Planned Development District 1 of the Town of Delafield Municipal Code. In addition, notice is hereby given that the following joint public hearing will be held by the Town Board, Town of Delafield Planning Commission, and a staff representative of the Waukesha County Department of Parks and Land Use, Planning and Zoning Division on Tuesday, March 16th, 2021, immediately following, but in this case concurrently with, the related town public hearing that is scheduled to begin. To consider the request of the Waukesha County Park and Plan Commission, RZ76, for text amendments to the Waukesha County Shoreland and Floodland Protection Ordinance to incorporate a Planned Development District 1. And just to remind everyone, the county's ordinance and the town's ordinance are identical. Okay. So with that, I'll open it up to the public.
Can we just also note that Town Board Supervisors Deanna Stopoulos and Supervisor Michaels are also present?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I think you're first. First speaker.
Good evening. My name is George Irwin. I'm the representative of the Thomas family. I was a representative at the work groups that were started. The work groups that were started were based, obviously, as Jason referred to, as a problem. The problem was a lack of consensus. Following public hearings about a year ago, that lack of consensus was very, very clear, and a process was necessary in order to see if we could reach a consensus on appropriate land uses for this property. Jason and the county was very effective in bringing the groups together. His thoroughness is apparent and obvious. I was going to talk briefly about the consensus building that occurred during that workshop, but I think Jason has carefully explained what that was all about. And in fact, we didn't move on until words like Can you live with that? Does that make sense? Is that viable? We'd move on when consensus was reached. And it was very, very thought-provoking. When we had disagreements, data was provided. That data was meaningful because oftentimes we had fears about outcomes. What about traffic? He gave us the analysis. So the result of that process was a problem was solved, an outcome was generated, and that's the ordinance before you. It's not perfect, but it represents all the stakeholders' concerns. What is it has imposed upon the property owners are significant burdens or barriers to future development. The entire project has to be master planned. That master and plan will require a developer to expend significant sums of money. Sewer study, stormwater management, traffic impact analysis, environmental assessment. All of those things cost money, and the outcome of that is a well-planned master plan project. We have multiple generations of family members who now are going to be required to work together within this regulatory framework so that the outcome is assured, and that outcome is an attractive, high-tax base, traffic-friendly project. What you have before you is a problem that was solved through that workshop, and the ordinance is the solution, and we urge your adoption. If there is any tweaking, and if I have more than 5 seconds left, I'll give you some suggestions on tweaking. But at this point, our perspective is we're supportive of this ordinance. We want it to move forward. We think we have quality developers who are willing to embrace it, and we can have an attractive development in the town. Thank you very much. Hopefully I won't bump anything there, Dan.
My name is Alan Nepper from Brookstone Circle in the High Point subdivision, which is just west of Glen Cove. And obviously I've been here before and kind of following the action as much as I can because again, our subdivision is going to be impacted. And I think I would say up front, this is not about the Thomas family right to sell or develop the property. I think everybody would agree they'd be doing the same thing at this point. This is about the quality of the development. This is about any adverse effects to the existing property owner, which I am one of, and there's 26 in the subdivision, and how it fits the overall character of the town. I'll go through some quick, big things, but as you look at the big project, they may seem a little smaller, but it's not as far as our subdivision goes. Light pollution, still, I don't think is nailed down hard enough, and I would just give you Day Spring Church glowing in the dark tonight as an example. 3-story height, especially adjacent to Glen Cove Road. I realize it's been brought in 500 feet, but if you look, that still impacts our entire subdivision. Road access on Glen Cove. I watched the school bus stop there, little kids, mothers, standing there waiting for them. That's exactly where that road is planned to come out, and that is going to be a negative. Water issues. We all have our individual wells. We need to look very strongly at what a large well or other installations would do to our water level on our individual wells. A berm has been proposed, and I hear 75 feet. We really need to clarify measured when, where, and how, center line of the road, property line, where's the property line, etc. The quality of that berm will have a big impact on not only our subdivision, but others down the road. Lastly, or almost lastly, we have some examples going on around us right now on the slippery slope of density. We've got Oconomowoc, where there was a development that was almost there. And then it got changed through the courts to higher density. You've got Heartland with a multifamily development that had one run added and now a second run with higher density. And last but not least, you've got the GE campus in Pewaukee that was condos and is now going to be changed to individual apartments. That slippery slope concerns me very much. Are those all zeros for me, Dan? Yes, they are. Thank you. And again, the work group, thank you. That's a huge project. Everybody worked their butts off. Let's minimize the amount of work everybody has to do going down the road. Thanks.
Mary Sue Graff, N18W28941, Gulf Ridge South. I live in the condominiums across Elmhurst Road. I guess our concern really is for the density. And that piece of land along Elmhurst Road is going to be a real nightmare if you're going to allow 2 or 3 stories. You can't have underground parking there because it is bedrock. You're going to have one big parking lot. The traffic study on Gulf Road maybe said it can handle, I don't know how many thousands of cars, but anybody who has used Gulf Road, particularly in the afternoon, knows it's already a nightmare, and it's going to be even worse when the density increases. The working group that was involved in this was basically one person, but I want you to know that that person represented over 300 neighbors. So it was one person, but there were 300 of us behind that person. The other thing is that this board, when you decide this, you're going to set a precedent for the town. And this is going to be something that this board has decided is going to change the whole nature of this area. You can have you can say you can have density and all that kind of stuff, but having to live with this and having to have this type of a project and with this density where we live is going to be an absolute nightmare. It's going to be a change in the environment, it's going to be a change in the neighborhood, and it's going to be just an absolute nightmare. I guess the last thing I wanted to say was that the gentleman talked about these problems were solved. The problems have not been solved. They have not been solved according to what the neighbors want. And I think it's a misnomer to think they've been solved. They've been addressed, but they have not been solved. Thanks.
I'm her husband, so it's the same address, same place. Well, basically, well, I have a lot of objections, but you've heard them from all the other people, the objections about streets and everything. My 2 main objections are the density. This town is, the precedence has been loaded by other administrations for much lower density. I think you got some emails talking about this increases density from, could increase 400 to 900%. I don't think there's enough open space. Everything I dealt with in the city has always been somewhere between 60 and 80% open space. And some of these proposals just blow that all out of the water. And I think the one nice thing about open space is if you require a lot of open space, you can hide parking lots and bad, worse things. So, so I'm just, so basically, I was involved in 3 projects in the town, And we were really held to following the town and county requirements on density, on traffic, on every other thing. So my recommendation is, the other thing is, all this work that's been done, everybody kept saying, well, a developer comes in and doesn't know what to do. But you have done a lot of work, and a developer could come in today and take your plan and propose it. And so my recommendation is you don't approve the plan the way it is. You let a developer come in with a definitive plan of what he's gonna put here, and then it's like the other gentleman said, it doesn't get changed. That you should really have someone who knows what's doing. So the other thing, I don't know what the issue is, but when I was working on the fiduciary piece, there was talk about if you had residential that close to the freeway, you may have to put up sound barrier walls. And I don't know if that's an issue now on this site. And then also, I think with that condominium, or that subdivision on the west side, they also, I think those berms were put up for the same thing, for sound and traffic. So I don't know if that's been considered that. Real quick, I'd like to make, I just gotta do this real, I know I only have 40 seconds left. This is not a political statement, but I believe this is a real comparison to what's going on in Washington, D.C. If you saw the first 3 or 4 days of Biden's administration, he sat there with a stack of executive orders by the previous administration, which was the Keystone Pipeline, the Mexican Wall, Katrina, World Health, and that just got eradicated with one stroke of the pen. Now we're sitting here in the town of Delafield, okay, with prior administrations pushing low density, high open space, maximum 2 stories, limited parking, no stoplights, and I feel this program sets a precedent for just eradicating that policy. Thank you.
My name is Anthony Cogan. I live on Brookstone Circle. We moved out here because of the lot sizes, and I am a little concerned that we are looking at going down to 1/4 and 1/3 acre size lots, and I think the reason a lot of us moved out here was probably because we didn't want to see roofs everywhere. And that is what's going to end up happening with the single-family portion of the neighborhoods. My other concern is I moved from the town of Brookfield. I lived along Davidson Road, and we had senior housing along Davidson Road. And I don't know if you've considered the amount of emergency vehicle traffic that is going to be increased. I don't even know if we have the capacity with what we have here to handle that. Just very concerned with some of the aspects of things that may not have been considered. I'm also wondering why everybody keeps talking about the developer, but nobody will disclose a developer so that we can maybe look and see some of the projects that they've done in the past that are similar to this. And it might be better to disclose that first and have them bring some projects and show some of the things that they've done that are similar to this before making a final decision on what we're doing. And I'm a little concerned with the road that might be coming out right at my road end. They were talking about the school bus traffic. My big concern is how much of the other development is connected to that. If we have just the residential portions where it's not connected all the way through the development, there's going to be less people taking shortcuts through and hopping through to get places and do stuff like that. And it will lower the amount of traffic also on Glen Cove. So those are kind of my concerns, and I was just wanting to tell you all this. Thanks.
I
I'm Lloyd Williams at W289 N520 Elmhurst Road, Waukesha, Wisconsin. Better put my glasses on. I'm Lloyd Williams and a lifetime resident of the town of Delafield. I also served 6 years on the town of Delafield board, so I know what you guys are going up against here. I had the pleasure of knowing the Thomas family for many years. It has truly been an honor that the Thomas family has rented me this farm for decades. As we reminisce back in time, Jim Thomas and I would sit on the tailgate of a pickup truck, and he can tell you where the barbed wire fence goes through Pewaukee Lake, when part of it was a marsh and part of it was a lake. It is my understanding that between the neighbors, town input, and Waukesha County has spent numerous hours to come up with this plan to develop this property. Many of these people are well-educated as planners and have tremendous knowledge to develop property. I would consider them experts in their profession. It is my opinion that they did an outstanding job for the best use to develop this property. The quality of this development will be outstanding. They had a tremendous vision for the needs that people are looking for. The town of Delafield, the Kettle Moraine School District, and Waukesha County will be very blessed for their huge increase in the tax base. I highly recommend the town to get a professional to get a projection on what the property will generate in taxes each year as this gets built out. We need this revenue now in the town of Delafield. I know that this will be a very difficult decision for Plan Commission and Town Board to make on this property. But keep in mind that you are making the decision for the entire town. I support this project as proposed. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else present in the hearing room that would like to speak?
Good evening, Pete Ogden, Happy Hollow Road, Pewaukee, Wisconsin. Lloyd's words are right on. There's a good group of people that got together. Jason did an awesome job. My really point is, even me, as an example, I brought up things on the board as an example, multifamily. After this came out and people in the community saw it, they were totally against it. So I just want you to hear that, and I'm sure you've heard tonight, I don't know, I got here late, but people in general don't want what's in this. You know, they want what's around them, single-family homes and condominiums. And I get that we need tax base, but at the end of the day, what we do today will be representative of our entire community, 50, 100 years from now. And so even though our wallets might be needing this, the people that live here, they don't want it. Please hear that. There was 4 of us on this board that live here, Kathy, Jim, myself, Mike, and I'm sure you've heard from them, but the people that have talked with us, that have read this, it was very well done, right? But they don't want really 2 things, density. And I'll just use one example. I spent my own money for you guys when we were looking at the industrial side of this thing. If you recall, I had Tony Zanin, who sat on the committee with us, and he showed you what it would be if you approved this, and he showed you what it is today. And it was, I thought, like, whoa, right? I mean, it was an eye-opener for me. And I think if you look at it in that light, granted this is not industrial, this is multifamily, or this is residential. Look at it from that standpoint. So density is a big deal, I think. And then I was nice enough to talk to Kevin today, and if we could limit this to 3 or 4 units per building across the entire site, I think that would be a wonderful thing. So buildings could be no larger than 3 or 4 units. I think it would solve the massing, and I think it would solve a lot of issues. Thanks very much for your time.
Anyone else here present like to speak before we open it up to the Teams call?
I'm Rob. I think most of you know who I am. I live on Oakton Road. I'm here tonight as an owner, one of the owners of the property. I'm here also as a work group participant, and I'm here primarily as a resident, long-term resident of the town. And I want to encourage the Planning Commission to approve and embrace the ordinance that you have in front of you as it is, without placing any more restrictions on it, which have been talked about. And the reason that I'm endorsing it is part of it, I'm part of the work group, and that's how we agreed to operate by majority rules. But second of all, I think this thing's got a chance to be built. We've been sitting on property for 25 years, or 50 years, but 25 years that had zoning potential to it that had no chance of ever being built. And obviously it wasn't. We couldn't generate any interest. This, I think, has a chance to be built, and I think it has a chance to be built in a quality way. And I think if you remember me talking before, I'm quite interested in doing something on this farm, as are my relatives, of quality. And I think this has got potential to do that. We need to attract a quality developer, and I think that this type of potential that this projects could do that. I think by tweaking it with more restrictions, which has been talked about a lot, is just going to make this less attractive to a quality developer that might be interested. So I encourage you, point number one, I encourage you to pass it, send it on to the town board. I just want to mention that, as you all know, we're in competition with other municipalities for development. And basically, developers are going to take a look at what the allowed uses are. This is quite restricted. What the allowed densities are. And this is, although I've heard quite a bit about density tonight, what we're hearing from developer people is that the 6 units on multifamily is just something that's unrealistic. In fact, we even had one person who was quite interested, and we haven't had many that are interested at this juncture, but just back away because of that type of density that they just feel that they can't justify endorsing. So, third thing, Lloyd talked a little bit about it, is increase the tax base. I think it's very important for the town. We recently had a referendum, which we're all familiar with, that did not go well for the town. And because of it, the town's in a position where it needs to borrow money on a yearly basis. This is probably the best opportunity. Is that my time there? I'm just about out? Okay. This is the best opportunity that the town has to increase its tax base. So I would tastefully, I would encourage you to use it for that purpose. So I guess my time is up. So I had one other point, but we'll let that go. I'd recommend that you approve this and send it on to the town board in this present form.
Okay, anyone else here present? Okay, not. Ben, can you turn this over to the folks on the Teams call?
Yeah, we ready to do the virtual? Absolutely. So maybe I can just kind of go over some quick ground rules and a 2-minute primer on how to use Teams for folks not familiar. We got folks who are connected through the Teams app using the full video function, and then we have a number of folks who have called in using just a phone connection. So for those of you connecting directly through Teams, and I know a few of you are already using it, there is a hand raising function. Should be up towards the upper right hand of your screen. Again, by hitting that, it'll indicate that you have a question, and we will be calling people in order here. So please raise your hand when you're called. Feel free to ask your question. If you can remember to lower your hand, I'd appreciate it. I'll try to clean up after you if you forget, but it'll just help kind of clear the queue here. So we will go through the Teams folks first. That's a little bit easier because of the hand function. For those of you on the phone, to keep this orderly, here's how we're going to go about it. So everybody right now is muted. And so in order to unmute, and I apologize for not mentioning that, in Teams, there's a microphone button. You just click that on and off to toggle mute and unmute. And currently, again, everybody is muted. So you will need to unmute yourself before you speak. On the phone, the mute and unmute function is just hitting *6 on your keyboard. So again, *6 will mute you or unmute you, and *6 will remute you. So please keep that in mind. Everybody is currently muted, and you'll need to unmute to speak. So when we go through the folks connecting via phone, the only real way for me to know if you have a question is we will do the following. I will say to all phone callers, please unmute your phone. If you have a question, everybody on the phone will need to hit *6. I'll see those phones unmute. I'm going to jot down those phone numbers very briefly, and then I'm going to mute everybody again. But then I'll know who has a question. And so I will just call you by phone number. And when your phone number is called, please hit *6 again to unmute yourself to speak. So I apologize for all the muting and unmuting, but there's really no other way for me to be indicated that somebody on the phone has a question. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to Jeff Melcher, who I think has set a record for being patient, having his hand up for the last half an hour. So Jeff, go ahead if you have a question. And you're muted, Jeff, so make sure you hit the unmute the microphone button there on Teams to speak.
I do not have a question. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm going to lower your hand then, Jeff. Not a problem. James Frett, you were up next here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Jim Frett, Gulf Ridge Subdivision. I'll try and go quick here. I covered a lot of this previously. Part of the work group, just a couple comments on that. Great group. Jason did an awesome job leading it. Really, everyone was very cooperative. Majority rules, though, there were 4 residents. There were multiple owners. The owner's lawyer, George. We had county and we had town people there. So majority rules, we didn't have a chance, to be quite frank. But that being said, everyone worked really well together. We were under the understanding that the draft ordinance would come to this public hearing. We would provide feedback from all the residents, and then it would be addressed. At least I know it's still compromised, but all along the understanding was it comes to a public hearing. The point of a public hearing is to listen to the residents and then take that feedback and make more improvements. So with that said, I'll just hit a couple other high points. Again, lots of good stuff in this plan. The buffers, yeah, maybe not perfect, but we tried to use tree lines to do all these different zones. I think a lot of positives. That being said, at the end of it, again, I clearly stated concerns around density, still have major concerns around density. Density increased very late in the game as well. So again, have even more concerns there. When it's been said many times very well, Town of Delafield, perfect environment, residential, recreational, responsible. I understand that doesn't mean you can't develop, but I think there's a better middle ground than what we're talking about right now. As already stated, residents, they would love to see it be a farm still. Obviously, that's probably not in the works. If it can't be a farm, they would like to see it similar as the surrounding neighborhoods, and it's most of the town of Delafield. If that can't happen, you know, maybe doubling the density seems reasonable. And then you get into tweaking. So, again, I won't get into all of it. I just think there needs to be a cap on how many units for senior living. I've stated that very clearly. I also, as Pete mentioned and others, I'm not in favor of apartments. If we have to have them, keep them contained to that center piece of land and capping how many units. Right now, it's way too high for both of those types of residential. 3-story buildings up along Elmhurst Road and even as close as they are on the other side to Glen Cove doesn't make sense. Would rather not see them at all. That being said, I'll just, again, I'd ask the Plan Commission, the board, please look at some significant changes, but again, we can use what's there, it just needs some significant changes. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. So I have up next, I have, and I apologize in advance, I'm bound to get somebody's name mispronounced, but I have Coons or Kunz, you're next.
Okay, would it be possible for you to pull up the graphic that showed the conservancy areas and the tree lines?
Jake, is that something you would be able to do? Jake, did you hear that? Oh, thank you.
Can you see it, Ben?
Are you able to pull that up or not? Okay. So if you look at the zone 1, the tree line in zone 1 along the west side goes significantly further than what you have identified as conservancy. And so my concern in previous discussions with the town, they have been totally against any restrictions to what people can cut down and what they can mow over and all that kind of stuff. And so if those areas are not protected in this plan, there is no assurance that some guy couldn't come in there and cut down all the trees. So that's issue number 1 that I'd like to speak to. I think that area, that tree line along the west side of zone 1 needs to be protected just as other green areas are. Okay, my second comment is regarding density. If you look at all of the areas that are adjacent to us, the density tends to be 3/4 of an acre or thereabout. And to speak to the issue that, well, you know, it's not developable at 3/4 of an acre, I'll just point out that Woodridge subdivision, which is at North Shore and Maple, totally sold out in about a year and a half, 3/4 of an acre lots. So the issue that they're not sellable at that, I think, is a bunch of baloney. And I think we need to have 3/4 acre lots for all of the residential areas, with the exception of a narrow band along Gulf Road, where we can try to soften the effect of the noise from I-94 and Gulf Road traffic. But everything else should be 3/4 of an acre to be consistent with the feel of the community and what everybody who's lived out here and bought out here has bought into. So those are my two items. Number 1, protect the woodland areas, because they're not protected right now in your plan from what you've shown us. And number 2, reduce the densities, with the exception of the areas along Gulf Road, a narrow band along Gulf Road. Thank you.
Next up, we have Paul Lois.
Thank you, Paul Lois, Brookstone Circle, live adjacent to the proposal here. Want to hit on a couple things. I mean, I think most people have talked about it. The overall density is definitely an issue. I think, I mean, bottom line is this is a town. It needs to represent the town. I would also call out, I mean, it sounds like, okay, majority rules or different things like that. I would point out to the board here, you represent the town. You don't represent the developer. It seems like we're doing a lot and potentially making changes to the overall town for an individual landowner. And that's not representative of the town. This proposal here is not representative of the town. I can empathize with the Thomas family and wanting to maximize. So I grew up on a family farm in Kenosha County in the town of Brighton. And when the time comes that we sell and potentially develop that land, the value of that land will be based on 5-acre residential lots, because that is what the town of Brighton is representative of. We're ultimately, changing the overall town for an individual landowner and developer that aren't representative, and you don't represent any more than myself. So the fact that the weighting there definitely seems off. I would also talk to the tax base. We can talk to the tax base, but if we think the higher density is somehow going to, not come with its own level of expenses and create revenue, I guess I would assume that revenue is going to be passed back in lower taxes than to the rest and not spent. I think to the point, we've made that pretty clear as to what we will spend on, and we did pass the referendum for Kettle Moraine schools, and we didn't on some of the other services. We live in a low tax area. I think people are happy with it. We must be doing something right. So, claiming that all the revenue is needed, I don't know why it's needed. I think most people are pretty happy with the services that we're receiving, as well as, the environment that we have out here. I think as well, so if we talked about previously, this was zoned, some level of office and commercial. I think the original green space was something like, it was office, but it was something like 90% green space or something like that. The amount of not green space is just irresponsible, quite frankly. So I hope you guys take a look at this. I'm honestly shocked that this much time and effort's been spent onto it, really for the benefit of, I see two people, right? The landowner, and ultimately the developer. And I'll remind you, you don't represent the developer, you represent the town residents. Thank you.
And Ben, just a reminder, you're on mute, I think, as we shared.
Oh, thank you. If it didn't happen to me once a week, it wouldn't be a week around here these days. So I'm sorry about that. I have Peter Weber up next.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Peter Weber. I reside at 590 Foxtail Drive in Pewaukee and have lived in Waukesha County my entire life. I have been a close friend of the Thomas family for over 15 years and known them to be trustworthy and sensitive people to those around them. These aren't disenfranchised, money-hungry people. This land has been in the Thomas family for more than 145 years. The farm is a place where all of the current family owners once called home. 2 of them were actually born on the property, and 1 still resides adjacent to the farm. But it is time for the family to move on from this land and pass it on to others to enjoy. Others have spoken about the specifics of this plan. I am here to speak of the integrity of this family and to their desire to find a workable use for this land. I happen to know that before this formal process began, the Thomases hired a certified planner at the town's recommendation and the family's expense to try to arrive at a development plan that would be acceptable to the town. After more than half a year's work, the town chairman at that time decided he was not going to run again for office and was not receptive to hearing the plan. When they began this formal process with the town did not want residential development within 1,000 feet of the expressway. The town focused on other mixed uses for that portion of the land, and the Thomases embraced the town's plan that allowed for mixed use, including light industrial, among other uses. When it became clear that that land use was not going to work, they willingly and in good faith participated in the county's work group meetings. It is my understanding that this ordinance is a product of those meetings. The Thomas family has been nothing but cooperative and willing to work with the municipalities and to include whoever else in this process to arrive at a workable use for their property. I see thoughtful, well-planned expansion everywhere in neighboring communities. Municipalities are benefiting from an increase in their tax base, and local neighborhoods and residents are seeing their property values rise with improved infrastructure and development. The Thomas family has a right to sell their land at a fair price and have been working with the county, town, and neighbors with transparency, honesty, and integrity. I feel they have demonstrated a commitment that their land be developed in a thoughtful, reasonable, and sensitive way. I thank you again for your time and consideration in approving this ordinance that is before you. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Jen Holdquist next.
Can you see me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, apparently my camera's not working. My name is Jennifer Holdquist. I am an owner and I live in Indiana. My mother, Catherine Thomas Johnson, left her ownership of the family farm to my sister Kellen and me when we lost her to cancer in 2012, bringing the number of owners from 4 to 5. Both my sister and I spent the first years of our childhood in that brick farmhouse on the property, and we have wonderful memories associated with the farm. We want to see a quality development, just as you all do, on our family farm. This property will someday not be farmland, as we all know, and it should be everyone's goal to ensure it has a beautiful, purposeful future that we can all be proud of. But this future for the property is only viable if the allowed uses are financially worthwhile to a developer. We hope that the ordinance passed will be one that a quality developer can hopefully finally find viable after 25 years of the current zoning. There's been interest in the past, sure, but either the developer wanted only a portion but not the whole property, they wanted to pay an insulting fraction of the farm's worth, or the developer, time and time again, was unable to accomplish their goals due to the excessively restrictive zoning. This is why I am begging for you to please adopt the resolution as presented. I maintained weekly correspondence with family and followed along with every work group presentation, supporting document, and correspondence along the way, and was absolutely blown away at how thorough and insightful the research and preparations were for each meeting. This work group worked tirelessly on both sides, and the consensus arrived truly detailed such an Our family has been willing to make great sacrifices as compromises, and we have been concerned with the restrictions placed, many land uses eliminated in the studies this ordinance requires. Not to mention the burden of requiring a master plan in order to sell, requiring multiple generations of owners to bind their land together as we have done. A requirement that no other landowner in any other community faces. We have been patient, we have been cooperative, and we have made serious compromises in order to move forward with the work group process. And a compromise was reached. I beg you all to honor the hard work that has been done by all of the parties of the work group and adopt the resolution as presented, as it was agreed to. My mother did not want to pass this burden on to me and my sister, and I don't want to do that to my children. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Joel Wolfel.
Hello, my name is Joe Wolfley, N20W30060 Glen Cove Road, and I will be relatively brief, but just additionally agree to some of the concerns on density, some of the concerns on some of the unanswered questions about traffic around Glen Cove Road. Additionally, some just they've all been expressed as far as those, and when we're talking about the comment that was made as far as a hard time developing condos along 94. Part of that image, right, that on that first slide that had all the different zones broken out, I'd just like to point out also that the two buildings in the bottom left corner of that image are condos. Those are the condos that are in Higher Edge. So, you know, I just hope there's some additional consideration taken into account on the density that is being proposed for a few of those areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Nicole Bostrom.
Yeah, my name's Nicole Bostrom, and I live on Brookstone Circle, so right across the Glen Cove Road there. I'm an attorney as well as being a real estate broker. And so this development, not only being close in proximity to my family, and I grew up on Glen Cove Road, so I've been in this area for 40-some years. It's really important that we pay attention. I will say that I think the Thomases are great people, and I think I went to school with their kids, and I have no question that it's okay to develop this land. I don't foresee this being a farm field forever, and so I think development is needed. From a real estate standpoint, I can tell you that our inventory is extremely tight. We're getting a lot more people wanting to move out here. We're getting a lot more people looking for condos, people who are in homes in the area and they would like to transition into a condo. So there is definitely a need for residential. I would say one of my concerns is density, because as I drive through, even just driving along Highway 18, going into Waukesha, you know, some of the subdivisions that they built there, when you drive down, you're seeing country, farm, and then you're seeing a field of rooftops. And I don't think that's what the town of Delafield wants to be known for. So I do definitely think that there's a need to develop. I would also say my husband, Anthony, spoke, and he raised the point of when we lived on Davidson Road and the senior care facility that was just down the road. And I will say there were fire trucks and ambulances there 3, 4, 5 times a day. And I just want the town to consider that in part of its plan, depending on what type of facility we'd be put there, that is going to absolutely have an increase in cost and a burden on the town's cost. That being said, I also think seniors definitely need care facilities, and they should be able to have them in the area that they're used to being. They shouldn't need to move to a different community. So I'm kind of on both sides of the fence here. So I just wanted to raise those points.
Thank you. I have one other hand up, and that's Jerome Janzer.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Janzer. Let me turn on my video here if you can see me. I'm a resident at W307 N1677 Shadowwood Point. Been in the town of Delafield for over 25 years and have grown up and lived in Waukesha County for the most of my life. I'm also a real estate development attorney with over 35 years of experience, represented developers in all of the municipalities in southeastern Wisconsin, and have done many developments, much like what's being proposed here. And representing developers, I know that one of the first things you got to look at is compatibility with the surrounding area. And what we have here is a classic square peg in a round hole problem. The square peg being a very intense development surrounded by completely rural residential area. Normally you'd want a transition area where you go from the residential large lots to the more intense area. The problem with this particular site is that you don't have the room to do that because it's surrounded by large lot residential other than the multifamily, the condominiums up on High Ridge. And to put this kind of development in this area is just particularly poor planning. So while I appreciate the time that went into the working group, and I have stayed in touch with members of the working group, the problem is you just got a poor plan for a very rural area. And that would mean that you would lead to uses that are more compatible with the surrounding area, which would make that entire site residential. And by making the entire site residential, it'll have a transition area to do that. There's been no indication that residential is not viable along the freeway. We've seen, as mentioned earlier by other speakers, there's a market for those kind of lots. You'd be able to sell them, and you'd be able to have single-family residential lots. As to the tax base, I've heard that mentioned. We have some of the lowest taxes anywhere in Wisconsin. I've not heard people complaining about that. And the idea of this kind of intensity will add a significant tax increase in my mind because of the additional needs of the community. So I think what I'd like to say in closing, I think the project is just too dense. I think you can make a very wonderful project here that would be contiguous and compatible with what's around it. I think the Thomases, they won't make all the money they want to make, but they will make plenty of financial return on their investment, or in their property rather. And also the last thing I'd just like to say is you do represent all the residents of the town. And obviously we can't poll 9,000 people at the town to find out what they'd want. But everybody I've talked to, other than hearing family members or somebody who's got an interest in the property like the Thomases, I've heard everybody speak against this project. People that live nearby or don't live nearby. This is not what they want for Delafield. That's the reality of it. And so I understand that the Thomases want to develop it. The reality is their property is located in the town of Delafield. It's not located in Cudahy. It's not located in Oak Creek. It's not located in Sussex. It's located in the town of Delafield. And they have to be compatible with their neighbors. And with all due respect, I ask the Plan Commission and ultimately the board to consider all 8,000 to 9,000 residents of Delafield in the community they wanted to and they moved into. So thank you very much for the time to speak. I appreciate the hard work everybody's putting in, and I hope we look out for the good of our community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other hands raised, so why don't we move on to the folks calling via cell phone, and if hands pop up, I see a few popping up, but we'll go back to any hands that are raised, so we won't forget about anybody. So again, the format for folks connecting via the phone, I have about 10 of you, is that in 2 seconds, I'm gonna say, please unmute your phone. Again, you do that by hitting *6. Mute, unmute is *6, just toggling on and off. Please hit *6 right now to unmute yourself. I'm just gonna need a minute to jot down everybody's phone numbers here. I see a few folks are unmuting, and then I'm gonna go ahead and mute everybody. Jay Kiermans, can you make sure that the planner of the day computer gets unmuted so that I believe that's our audio feed for the Teams broadcast, because I may unmute you here, so just be prepared to untoggle that. All right, I'm just gonna give it a couple more seconds here, and then I'm gonna jot down our phone numbers, and we'll start calling you by your cell phone number here. So just give me 1 second, folks. Almost ready here. Okay, I'm gonna mute everybody here. In 1 minute, I'm gonna call you by your number, and remember, hit *6 to unmute to be able to speak. Okay, the first caller I have is 414-416-9800. So if you're at 414-416-9800, you have to hit *6 to unmute your microphone, or we won't be able to hear you. All right, I'm going to give it a second here, and then we'll just move on to the next caller here. Jake, you can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get back to you guys. There'll be another opportunity here. So I'm going to move down my list here. The next person I have was at 414-333-2059.
Ben?
Yes. Is this Craig?
Ben, can you hear me?
Yep. Is this Craig?
Great. Yep. This is Craig Caliendo. I'm the president and CEO of Kingsway Homes. We are a custom single-family home builder, subdivision developer, and we also do condominium developments. It's also a member of the Thomas Farm Work Group. Now, this property, because of its proximity and its exposure to the expressway, is a bit of a challenge because those attributes lend themselves to development like office development, multifamily apartment development, senior living development. We do single-family homes and condos, and even though there's a large demand for
there is a lot of pushback and not demand for something that's going to have the exposure to the expressway like a lot of this property does. And I disagree with the comment made earlier that there's no transition planning as far as the layout goes here. You've got Zone 4, which is right in the middle of this property, and I think the work group did an excellent job of creating some transition planning where you have slightly higher density single family, slightly higher density condominiums, and low density single family surrounding this as a buffer to the kind of lower density single family that surrounds us. And that's really the challenge. You really do have some wonderful low density single family that surrounds this property, but to expect that this entire 152 acres is going to be developed as low density residential is not realistic, and that's the reason that it hasn't been developed. In addition, those uses, the apartment uses, the senior living uses, as a single family developer, we look at those as benefits in creating some synergies for our developments, because the families that are moving into our homes want some proximity to those types of buildings because it's housing for their parents or grandparents that are moving out of single family home but want to stay in the area. So I think this was really, in my opinion, an excellent compromise, a well thought out compromise of what realistically and economically can be developed on this property. And the hallmark of good land planning is when it's reflective of what can possibly and feasibly be developed on the property and can act as a catalyst to development. So I would urge the Plan Commission to adopt this. There was an enormous amount of time and effort put in by the county. There was input from people like me as a developer, and certainly this isn't the developer's wish list as far as land use planning, but I think it strikes a really reasonable compromise between single family, light density residential, and some uses, whether they're office or multifamily apartments or senior living, that will be appropriate along the expressway. So thank you very much.
Thank you. The next phone caller I had was the person at 262-313-7088.
Yes, can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, my name's Jim Rayberger. I'm at N19 W28998 Gulf Ridge North, just east of this development. I think the important thing to consider right now is that the neighbors that were on the committee with the work group, no one has spoken in favor of this deal. They have all, lately, I mean, my understanding, because I've been following it very closely, is that it's kind of shifted what the neighbors wanted lately. And what we're all looking for is that we want our neighborhood to stay the same as it's been. Why you guys want to change it, why you want to develop more tax base, I get that the Thomas family wants to do it. I get that Caliendo wants to make money and develop the property and all that stuff. But here's the situation. We moved to this community, and Ron Troy knows this. Everybody moved to this community because we have expectations of what the community is going to be. And now you guys want to change it just so you can get more tax base? That's not what we're looking for. What I would just say in conclusion is that here's the deal. There has been an ongoing group meeting for about a year now. But if you've noticed, none of the neighbors from the neighbors group have spoken out in favor of this. They've been kind of bowled over lately by what the developers are doing, what the county's doing, what the town's doing. And what we want to do is just maintain the integrity of our neighborhoods. So I don't know why you guys are hell-bent on doing this change to our community, but that's not what we're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the person at 414-416-9800. Did you have comments? Hi, if you're trying to speak, it looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Oh, great. Finally. Magnificent. I'm looking at the area along Elmhurst, and I think I heard you correctly in saying that those would be multifamily, that's zone 2 and part of zone 1. And I'm curious as to why you didn't make those all single-family half-acre lots. That's my question.
All right. I'm assuming nobody wants to field the question. Should we just move on to the next comments? Can I get a little direction here?
We're not taking questions.
Okay. All right. Sir, did you have any more comments other than the question?
Well, Jim.
Connection issue.
We can always go over to that other. Why don't we disconnect for a minute? Okay. How did you get in? Where's your link?
Just hit join.
Here.
Join now. You should be good.
Okay. I think we're back. Jake, you want to say something to Ben here?
Ben, can you hear us? Hold on. It's still connecting.
If that does not connect, Jake, we'll just run off this machine instead.
I'm not getting anything.
Okay. Ben, are you able to hear us through this machine?
Yeah, we just.
Your speaker on, Jason? I should be live. Ben, can you say something?
We just lost the signal entirely.
No, it's Jason.
Just this. Just lost the signal.
Okay, Jake, why don't you come over here for 1 second?
There we go. Now try it.
Okay, Ben, can you hear us now? We've switched machines.
Yeah, I can hear that.
Okay, we're just gonna try and get a microphone going. This machine, this computer's not quite as good as the other, but we lost our main computer.
Okay, are you able to hear the callers?
Yeah, we're just trying to get it as good as we can here. Why don't you go ahead and take the next caller?
Okay, ma'am, the woman at 315-1440, I apologize for the interruption. Go ahead and you can continue.
That's all right. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Okay, hi. This is Judy Fiducci. We live, Scott and I, at W291 N3796 Treeline Court with a Pewaukee mailing address in the town of Delafield. Scott and I and our family have lived in Still Meadow subdivision for 23 years. This subdivision was developed by Mr. Seatman, and it was during a time that the town board was establishing a philosophy for development of our town. What has made our town such a wonderful place to live is that has been an overriding consistent board philosophy that has grown with a focus and commitment to open space. There have been fights over the years, many fights. This is not something that's new. But in each case, when a conservative mindset has prevailed in our town, it's resulted in the protection of our open space and the protection of our town. The result has been that the new development, the people who want to sell their land and maximize their opportunity, the result has been they have had to change. And they have had to abide by our community value of open space. It is only by these hard battles that have taken place and that have listened to the town's attitudes and desires that our town is what it is today. Often those moving in or selling don't get as big as they want. It often results in lights getting turned down. It has resulted in the subdivision size being reduced, and I could go on and on. I'm here tonight to represent many people in our town that ask you, please protect our open space value. Please vote for conservative, reduced development during this evening's proceedings. Please protect once again our open space philosophy, and many changes need to be made to tonight's proposal before it's something that's really satisfying our community, the community's attitudes and desires for how we want to see our town developed. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who's connected via the phone that wanted to speak? If you do, please hit *6 on your phone to indicate that you want to speak. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead. I have another hand that's raised. So again, I don't want to say last call, but second call for anybody who wanted to speak via phone connection. Please hit *6. Okay, well, seeing nothing there, Kathy Gutenkunst, it looks like you had your hand up. Go ahead.
1 second here. I apologize, Ben. I had to get all my stuff turned on. I'm part of the working group. I live on Glen Cove Road. As I was getting ready for tonight's meeting, I went to the town website and I noticed that our motto is residential, recreational, and responsible. There was definitely not unanimous consent against on the committee. Jason and his team did a great job. But as I look back and preparing for this, I looked at the work group final height recommendations and the zone map, and I looked at the fact that we've got high density condo and seniors immediately adjacent to Glen Cove, and that was something that all the residents were opposed to, all the 4 of us who were on the committee. And I want to point out, we are 4 voices. We don't represent the town of Delafield, all 9,000 residents. And you also have to remember that we started, from my opinion, at a deficit. We started with light industrial, which should never have been up there. So when you start at light industrial, any place you go is a bonus. And again, Jason did a great job leading us through this. There's been interest in this property. We had 2 residents who came forward and said they made offers on this property. But it's not the town board's obligation to make sure people make money, because if we're gonna do that, I'd like multifamily on my site, and I'd like condos. But I think you need to hear the residents. I think overall the plan is good. I think it's too dense. I think the high-density condo senior immediately adjacent to Glen Cove with 1 in and 1 out is far too dense. I think the height is too much next to Glen Cove. And I think we need to remember what the gal just mentioned about Still Meadow, which was the Wheezy Farm, and the Lakeside Golf Course. I was involved with both of those. And I stood in the town hall when the golf course came through, and the developer wanted more dense, it was a small course, etc. The residents spoke, and the town board listened. And they told the developer, this isn't gonna fly. And so we called Jim Seaman, and he came in and he developed the site. As I said, this was a working group. Everybody worked hard. There was a lot of exchange of ideas, but it was not unanimous. The residents that were on that committee or working group had a lot of concern about the height, the density, and the proximity of those uses next to the residential being Glen Cove and Elmhurst. And I would really ask that the Plan Commission think long and hard. This is the last piece in town of Delafield. This is going to be, I don't know, your last say. Everyone, this is going to be it. When they drive down 94, you want them to think they're driving through the city of Waukesha, or you want them to think they're driving through the town of Delafield. Our motto is residential, recreational, and responsible. And I'd ask the Plan Commission and the town board to keep those 3 statements in mind as you proceed. And if necessary, send it back to the working group. We all spent an enormous amount of time without any pay to do this. But I'm sure we would meet again if you thought it was necessary. And I appreciate your time tonight. And Jason, again, thank you to you and your committee and your staff. You guys were great. Very, very appreciative.
Thank you, Kathy. I have Todd Cook next, and if anybody who's connecting via the phone again, last call, if you do want to connect, please hit *6. I'll jot down your number and remute you. So please, again, raise your hand if you do want to make comments, or hit *6 on your phone. Todd, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. You know, I decided to raise my hand just because it was becoming fairly evident to me that the Thomas family had stacked the deck and inviting people to call to the meeting. So I'm going to follow with Paul Lois, who made a number of great, eloquent points about where we live, what is represented here. As I talk to my fellow, just the people around me, all the rest of the neighbors here, and I'm on Glen Cove Road, by the way. As I talk to my neighbors, no one is in favor of any kind of high-density development on that farm field. So we're talking about rezoning, and rezoning, you know, it's not currently, you know, residential. It's agricultural. So to go from agricultural to residential, that's one step. And certainly, as Ms. Gudekunst brought up, you know, industrial. Well, that's on the other end of the spectrum. That should never even come on the table. I think we can all probably compromise and say, you know what, if you put a development out there that was single-family residential, I bet all the neighbors would be okay with that. So I just want you to think about that. I'm wildly against the high-density proposal that you have, although it was better than what we had proposed to us before. But, you know, if the representative want to represent the people, then do what's right, and it's not this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Did the caller under the sign-in of Ogden's want to speak? I know I saw that hand get raised and lowered, and I know Teams can be a little bit glitchy depending on the machine you're signed in with. Did you have something? Okay. I have no other hands up, nobody indicating through unmuting a phone they want to connect. Is there anybody else out there? I know Teams sometimes doesn't show us that our hands are raised. There we go. I have Eric with a bunch of backslashes in your name. Is it Eric? Eric Stowers? You're muted,
Yes,
Eric.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep, go ahead.
Great, excellent. You know, so I appreciate, you know, I've been, my name is Eric Stowers. I'm in the High Ridge neighborhood at N18 W30050, Crooked Creek Road. And I've been, you know, I've been in attendance pre-pandemic here through, you know, the first hearing that they hosted. And, you know, I do appreciate the pause that you did take here, you know, in involving other parties. You know, looking at, you know, obviously there are a number of points that people have made about, you know, why everyone's moved to this area. And, you know, there's a reason why I don't live in Oconomowoc as well. And, you know, the area, you know, obviously having a motto. And the reality, you know, one that has been, you know, resounding from a number of voices on this call. Not every area has a motto that's clear and concise. I also think that, you know, just looking at, you know, this compromise, if you may, you know, I think if you look at a compromise, there are, you know, there are things that multiple parties give and multiple parties take. But, you know, once again, I think looking at the way that the Thomas Family Farm engaged the board and, you know, consulting with the board's also had somewhat of a vested interest in this themselves. And I know long after the Thomas Family Farm has gone off this call, long after the Thomas Family Farm is sold their land, the residents, we're still going to be here. And we're, you know, as a result of however that land is used. So I wanted to appreciate the pause that you took in, you know, from the initial planning, rezoning ordinance meetings that you've had. I appreciate the pause and all the work that's been put into trying to configure a reasonable and, you know, solution to you know, to the residents in the town of Delafield, and also allowing the Thomas family, you know, to move forward. But once again, I think this is a residential. It's residential. We're surrounded by wetlands, the lake, and you know, my concern is also the environmental impact of this. You know, in one of the meetings, you know, just for a portion of our subdivision that borders the Thomas Family Farm, there was a segment of trees that had been taken out, which resulted in tens of thousands of dollars worth of additional landscaping to be done on a handful of you know, homes in our neighborhood. So that was just a small segment of trees. So as far as just looking at the environmental impact that this would have on the surrounding area for the entire space that you're looking to develop, I would just say, you know, just focus on residential, focus on the town and the individuals in the town that you're serving. And thank you.
Thank you. I have one last hand, the person who logged in under Ogden's. Did the person who logged in under Ogden's have a comment? Your hand was raised. I will take that as a no. Is there anybody else that was unable to provide comments, that raised a hand, that it just was having technical issues? I'm not showing anybody else having any desire to provide comments. Last call here, folks. I don't think we have anybody else with questions on the team side.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, that'll conclude our public hearings. Again, it was a joint one with Waukesha County tonight. We have a scheduled Planning Commission meeting next Tuesday to take this up again at 6:30 at this location. Thanks, everyone.